My name is Sophia, and I'm 34 years old. For 5 years, I've been happily married to Michael, living in our cozy Seattle home. We both decided early on that kids weren't in our future, focusing instead on our careers. Him as a successful architect, me as a therapist. That Sunday morning seemed like any other until I answered Michael's phone while he was showering. A child's voice chirped, "Hi, Daddy." I froze completely. We don't have children. Not a single one. If you're watching this video, let me know where you're from in the comments below. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and stick around to discover how one phone call changed everything I thought I knew about my perfect marriage. Michael and I met 6 years ago at a downtown Seattle art gallery opening. I was there supporting a friend whose paintings were being featured while Michael was invited as part of the architectural firm that had renovated the space. Our eyes locked across the room as we both admired the same abstract painting, and within minutes we were deep in conversation about the artist's use of negative space. Something just clicked between us. After exchanging numbers, we went on our first date the very next evening, dinner at a small Italian restaurant, followed by a walk along the waterfront. The conversation flowed so easily that we didn't notice the restaurant staff cleaning up around us. By our third date, I knew there was something special about this tall, thoughtful man with the infectious laugh and passion for creating beautiful spaces. 8 months of dating later, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. It wasn't an elaborate proposal, just the two of us on the beach at sunset with a simple ring and heartfelt words. I appreciated that about him, his ability to make profound moments feel intimate and genuine. Early in our relationship, we had several serious conversations about children. I had never felt that maternal pull that many of my friends described. My career as a therapist fulfilled my nurturing instincts, and I enjoyed the freedom of building my practice without the responsibilities of motherhood. Michael expressed similar sentiments, explaining that while he loved his nieces and nephews, he preferred being the fun uncle who could hand them back at the end of the day. He talked about wanting to focus on creating architectural landmarks and traveling the world together. "I want us to be enough for each other," he'd said, holding my hands in his. "I want our love story to be complete, just as we are." That mutual understanding strengthened our bond. While some of our friends and family members seemed puzzled or even disappointed by our decision to remain childless, we stood firm. Our wedding vows included promises to support each other's dreams and ambitions, to be partners in adventure rather than parenthood. After marriage, we settled into a comfortable routine. I opened my own therapy practice, specializing in anxiety disorders, while Michael continued climbing the ranks at Preston and Associates, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the Pacific Northwest. We renovated our craftsman-style home in Queen Anne, creating a space that perfectly reflected our personalities and needs. My home office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, his drafting room with windows overlooking the city skyline. Our weekdays were busy with work, but weekends were sacred time for us. Saturday mornings meant farmers' market trips and coffee at our favourite local spot. Sunday brunches often stretched into afternoon conversations about everything and nothing. Twice a year we travelled, one international trip to feed Michael's architectural inspirations and one domestic getaway just for relaxation. We were building toward our dream of buying land outside the city, where Michael would design and build our forever home from the ground up. We had the preliminary sketches pinned to our refrigerator, a modern yet warm structure that would blend seamlessly with the Pacific Northwest landscape. It was our 5-year plan, and we were right on track. I never had reason to doubt Michael or our relationship. We communicated openly, supported each other through professional challenges, and still maintained the spark that brought us together. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back, there were subtle shifts I chose to ignore. About 2 years ago, Michael began traveling more frequently for work. The firm had taken on projects in Oregon and California, requiring him to be away 3 or 4 days at a time, sometimes twice a month. I missed him during these trips, but understood that his growing reputation meant more responsibilities. His phone habits changed too. He used to leave it lying around without concern, but gradually became more protective, always keeping it in his pocket or face down on surfaces. When I mentioned this casually, he laughed it off, saying some of his clients sent confidential design plans that he couldn't risk anyone seeing. Even me, I'd asked, half joking. Client confidentiality applies even to beautiful wives, he'd replied, kissing my forehead. I accepted his explanation. After all, we had built our relationship on trust, and his career was important to both of us. If he needed to be more careful with client information, I wouldn't question it. Besides, he always made time for me when he returned from trips, often bringing small gifts or planning special dinners. Our life together seemed stable, happy, and heading in the direction we'd both chosen. There was no reason for me to suspect otherwise. No reason at all to imagine that a random Sunday morning would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I married. That Sunday started like any other. I woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of Michael moving around in the kitchen. He was an early riser, even on weekends, while I preferred to linger in bed until the aroma of breakfast lured me downstairs. But that morning something felt different. When I came down to the kitchen, Michael was pacing near the window, his phone pressed to his ear, voice lowered to a whisper. He startled when he saw me turning slightly away, as he quickly ended the call. "Morning, beautiful," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked tense, distracted. "Everything okay?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. "Just work stuff. The Portland project is having some issues with the foundation." He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him. "They need me to come in this afternoon to review the plans." "On a Sunday?" I raised an eyebrow. This wasn't the first weekend he'd been called away, but it was becoming more frequent. Michael shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "The joys of being senior architect. The building doesn't care what day it is when there's a problem." He gulped down the rest of his coffee. "I'm going to grab a shower before heading out." He kissed my cheek, but it felt perfunctory, lacking the warmth of our usual morning affection. As he headed upstairs, I noticed he'd left his phone on the kitchen counter. Something he hadn't done in months. I sat at the island sipping my coffee, trying to ignore the sleek black device just inches from my hand. Michael and I had always respected each other's privacy. We knew each other's passcodes for emergencies, but I'd never felt the need to check his messages or calls. Trust was the foundation of our relationship, I'd always believed, but something felt off. The whispered phone conversation, his jumpiness, when he saw me, the sudden work emergency on a Sunday. These small inconsistencies were adding up to a knot of unease in my stomach. The sound of the shower running upstairs provided a steady background noise as I sat there debating with myself. Was I overreacting? Was I looking for problems that didn't exist? I had seen enough troubled marriages in my therapy practice to know that paranoia could be just as damaging as actual infidelity. Then Michael's phone screen lit up with an incoming call. A name flashed across the screen. Laura, not a name I recognized from his firm or our social circle. The phone continued to vibrate, moving slightly across the marble countertop. I stared at it, frozen in indecision. The rational part of my brain said to let it go to voicemail. The increasingly suspicious part wondered who Laura was and why she was calling my husband on a Sunday morning. Before I could fully process my decision, I reached for the phone and swiped to answer. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound casual. There was a brief pause, and then a high, clear voice came through the speaker. Not a woman's voice as I'd expected, but a child's. "Hi, Daddy. Are you coming to my recital today? Mummy said you promised." The words hit me like a physical blow. Daddy, recital, mummy. My mind raced to make sense of what I was hearing. Perhaps the child had dialed the wrong number, but they had asked specifically for Daddy, and the caller ID had shown a saved contact name. "Hello, Daddy." The little voice persisted, sounding confused by my silence. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, and my hand was trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "We don't have kids." Michael and I had agreed, no children. It was a cornerstone of our relationship, a mutual decision we'd never wavered on. So who was this child calling my husband Daddy? Is anyone there? Now the child sounded worried. "Mummy, the phone's not working." I heard a woman's voice in the background say something indistinct, and then the call ended. I sat motionless in the kitchen, still holding Michael's phone, trying to process what had just happened. The shower was still running upstairs, giving me a few more minutes to collect myself. But what was I supposed to do with this information? Confront Michael immediately, pretend I hadn't heard anything until I could figure out what was going on. My therapist training kicked in, reminding me not to jump to conclusions without all the facts. There could be an explanation I hadn't considered. Perhaps he was mentoring a child through a community program. Maybe a friend's kid had gotten attached to him, or maybe the water upstairs shut off. I heard Michael moving around in our bedroom. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, to decide how to handle this. Taking a deep breath, I placed the phone back exactly where he had left it and tried to compose my features into a neutral expression. I needed time to think, to investigate, to understand what was happening before confronting him. If I revealed what I knew now, Michael might create a convenient explanation, or worse, destroy evidence I needed to uncover the truth. I heard his footsteps on the stairs and made a split-second decision. I would say nothing for now. I would observe, gather information, and protect myself until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. When Michael walked into the kitchen, freshly showered and dressed in casual business attire, I smiled at him as if nothing had happened. "Your phone rang," I said, keeping my voice light as I pointed to the device on the counter. I didn't answer it. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I watched carefully as Michael's expression flickered with momentary panic before settling into a casual nod. "Probably work again," he said, quickly pocketing the phone without checking to see who had called. Another red flag. I should head out soon. As he gathered his things, I felt like I was watching a stranger wearing my husband's face. The familiar features were all there, the crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the way he always checked his pockets 3 times before leaving. But behind those familiar mannerisms was someone I suddenly realized I might not know at all. "Drive safely," I said as he headed for the door. "I hope you can fix whatever's wrong with the foundation." He paused, looking momentarily confused before nodding. "Right, the foundation. I'll try not to be too late." After the door closed behind him, I sank into a chair, my legs no longer able to support me. The house felt different now, filled with questions and suspicions where certainty had once lived. The child's voice echoed in my mind. "Hi, Daddy!" We don't have kids, but it seemed increasingly likely that Michael did. After Michael left, I sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour trying to process what had just happened and decide on my next steps. My hands were shaking and I felt nauseated with anxiety. As a therapist, I'd counselled countless people through moments of crisis. But now that I was living my own, all that professional knowledge seemed distant and unhelpful. I needed facts. I needed to know if what I suspected was true before confronting Michael. Acting on pure emotion without evidence would only give him room to deny everything and paint me as paranoid or irrational. I started with our home office, searching for any documents or correspondence that might provide clues. Michael kept most of his work files on his laptop, which he'd taken with him, but we had a small filing cabinet for household paperwork, taxes, insurance documents, mortgage statements. In the financial section, I found our joint checking account statements. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. Regular deposits from both our jobs, expected withdrawals for bills and expenses. But when I looked more carefully at the past year of statements, I noticed a pattern. On the 15th of each month, there was a transfer of $1,500 to an account labeled only as LW, Laura Wilson. It seemed too obvious a connection, but my suspicions were growing stronger. Next, I checked our credit card statements. Michael had his own card for work expenses, while we shared another for household purchases. The work card showed regular charges in Portland: hotel rooms, restaurants, gas stations. The trips aligned perfectly with his supposed work emergencies and project meetings. But it was in the desk drawer that I found something truly damning: a small stack of plane ticket confirmations for monthly flights to Portland that Michael had printed and forgotten to dispose of. All the one-way tickets from Seattle to Portland with no corresponding returns. Was he driving back, taking the train, or was the return trip charged to another account I didn't know about? My hands trembled as I turned on our shared desktop computer. Michael and I knew each other's passwords, another aspect of the open, trusting relationship I thought we had. I hesitated only briefly before typing in his email password. His inbox revealed little of interest, mostly work correspondence, some promotional emails, nothing suspicious. But then I checked his archived folders and found one labeled Property. Inside were emails exchanged with a real estate agent in Portland regarding the purchase of a home in the Selwood neighborhood. The emails dated back 3 years and discussed financing options, closing costs, and move-in dates. Michael had bought a house in Portland without telling me, a house that, according to the emails, had 3 bedrooms, perfect for a small family. I felt physically ill. The evidence was mounting, but I still needed to confirm my worst suspicion. I turned to social media, searching for Laura Wilson Portland on various platforms. Several profiles came up, but one stood out immediately: a woman around my age with auburn hair and a warm smile. Her profile picture showed her with a little girl approximately 4 years old, with Michael's distinctive hazel eyes and cleft chin. I scrolled through her photos with increasing dread. Most were of her and the little girl whose name appeared to be Emma based on the captions. But then I found one that made my blood run cold, a family picture at what looked like a birthday party. The image was cropped oddly, with an arm visible around Laura's shoulder, though the person had been cut from the frame. But I recognized that watch, the vintage Omega I'd given Michael for our 3rd anniversary. I didn't realize I was crying until tears splashed onto the keyboard. The evidence was overwhelming now. Michael, my husband of 5 years, had another family in Portland, a woman named Laura, a daughter named Emma, a house I'd never seen, a life completely separate from the one he shared with me. The timing hit me next. If Emma was around 4 years old, she would have been conceived right around our 1st anniversary. While I was planning a surprise weekend getaway to celebrate our 1st year of marriage, Michael was apparently starting another family. I felt rage building alongside my heartbreak. How had he maintained this deception for years? How many lies had he told me? How many times had he left our bed to call his other family? Did Laura know about me? Was she another victim of his duplicity, or a willing participant in destroying my life? Despite the mountain of evidence, I knew I needed absolute, indisputable proof before confronting Michael, something he couldn't deny or explain away. And I needed to protect myself, financially, legally, and emotionally, before the confrontation. I closed the computer and gathered the documents I'd found, storing them in a secure location outside our home. Then I contacted a private investigator recommended by a colleague who handled divorce cases. I needed eyes on the ground in Portland, someone who could document Michael's other life definitively. I need concrete evidence, I told the investigator during our call. Photos, video, anything that proves beyond doubt that he's living a double life. This isn't the first case like this I've seen, the investigator said kindly. We'll get you what you need. The next week was the hardest of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal while Michael was home laughing at his jokes, discussing work, even sleeping beside him while feeling like I was lying next to a complete stranger. Each time he checked his phone, each time he mentioned an upcoming work trip, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming the truth. I cancelled appointments with therapy clients, unable to focus on their problems while my own life was imploding. I told colleagues I had a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. My family was emerging, just not in the way anyone would have expected. When Michael left for his next business trip to Portland, I tracked his phone's location using our shared account. Sure enough, it showed him at a residential address in Selwood, the same neighborhood mentioned in the real estate emails. 7 days after I hired the private investigator, an email arrived with a link to a secure folder. "Everything you requested is here," the message read. "I'm sorry." With shaking hands, I clicked the link and began looking through the evidence of my husband's betrayal. The photographs were crisp and clear, leaving no room for doubt or alternative explanations. There was Michael entering the Portland house with a key. Michael pushing Emma on a swing at a park, the little girl's face alight with joy as she called out to her daddy. Michael and Laura, arm in arm, at what appeared to be a school event, looking every inch the devoted couple. Michael helping Emma ride a bike with training wheels. Michael carrying groceries into the house, clearly comfortable and familiar with the routine. The final photo showed Michael, Laura and Emma sitting on the front porch of the house, Michael in the middle, with his arms around both of them. They looked like a perfect family portrait, relaxed, happy, connected. The same way Michael and I appeared in the photos displayed throughout our Seattle home. I closed the laptop, unable to look anymore. The truth was undeniable now. Michael had created an entire separate life, complete with a home, a partner, and the child he claimed he never wanted. Every trip to Portland hadn't been for work, but to maintain this elaborate deception. Every late-night phone call wasn't to clients, but to his other family. The foundation of my life had been built on quicksand, and now I was sinking fast. But as the initial shock began to wear off, another emotion began to take its place: determination. Michael had taken enough from me already. I wouldn't let him take my dignity or future as well. I contacted the private investigator again. "I need more," I said firmly. "I need to know everything about their financial situation. I need to know if Laura knows about me. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I make my next move." As I waited for this additional information, I began to plan. If Michael could lead a double life, I could certainly pretend to be an unsuspecting wife for a little while longer. Just long enough to ensure that when I finally confronted him, I would be doing so from a position of strength, not vulnerability. The child's voice on the phone had changed everything. "Hi, Daddy," she had said, not knowing that those two simple words would unravel the carefully constructed lie that was my marriage. Now I had to decide what to build from the ruins. The investigator's final report arrived 2 days later, providing the last pieces of the puzzle. The financial details were particularly illuminating and infuriating. Michael had opened separate bank accounts 3 years ago, diverting a significant portion of his income to support his Portland family. He had purchased the Portland house outright in his name only while our Seattle home was jointly owned. He had even started a college fund for Emma. Most shocking was the discovery that Michael had recently updated his will, leaving 60% of his assets to Laura and Emma, with only 40% designated for me in the event of his death. He had been systematically protecting his other family while potentially leaving me financially vulnerable. The investigator had also managed to obtain information about Laura Wilson through public records and careful observation. She was 33 years old, worked as an elementary school teacher, and had met Michael at an educational conference where he was speaking about architectural design for schools. According to the report, there was no indication that Laura knew about me or our marriage. She wore a ring and referred to Michael as her husband in conversations overheard at local businesses. Based on my observations and the evidence collected, the investigator wrote, "It appears that Ms. Wilson believes she is in an exclusive, legitimate relationship with your husband. She likely believes his frequent absences are due to his work in Seattle, not another life." So Laura was another victim in Michael's elaborate deception. This information shifted something in my approach. My anger was still directed at Michael, but I now felt a complicated kinship with this woman I'd never met. We had both been lied to by the same man, both been living in carefully constructed false realities. With this knowledge, I made an appointment with Diana, a divorce attorney known for handling complex cases involving hidden assets. I brought 10 copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, including the investigator's reports. "This is one of the more elaborate double lives I've seen," Diana said after reviewing the materials. "But the evidence is clear and it works in your favor legally. Washington is a community property state and he's been diverting marital assets without your knowledge or consent." "What should I do next?" I asked. "If you're certain you want to divorce, and I can't imagine why you wouldn't, we need to protect your finances immediately. He's already moved assets around without your knowledge. We need to ensure he can't do more damage once he realizes you know." Under Diana's guidance, I took several steps to protect myself financially. I moved half of our joint savings into an account in my name only. I documented all our joint assets. I updated the beneficiaries on my own retirement accounts and insurance policies. I gathered important personal documents and stored them outside our home, along with irreplaceable family heirlooms and sentimental items. "Now, about the confrontation," Diana said during our final planning meeting. "You're under no obligation to tell him you know until we serve him with divorce papers, but I sense you want that moment of reckoning." She was right. Despite the legal advantages of surprise, I needed to see his face when he realized his deception was exposed. I needed to hear whatever explanation he might offer, not for reconciliation, but for my own closure. "If you do confront him," Diana continued, "do it in a public place or with someone else present. People can become unpredictable when their secrets are exposed, and record the conversation if possible. Washington is a two-party consent state for recordings, but having evidence of his reaction could still be useful." As I prepared for the confrontation, I found myself needing emotional support. I reached out to my closest friend Allison, revealing the whole situation. Her shock quickly turned to fierce protectiveness. "That absolute bastard," she said, after I showed her the evidence. "What can I do to help?" "Just be there," I replied. "I might need somewhere to stay after everything explodes." "My guest room is yours for as long as you need it," she promised. But there was one more person I felt I needed to speak with before confronting Michael Laura Wilson. After considerable thought, I decided she deserved to hear the truth from me directly rather than from Michael, who would likely try to manipulate the narrative once exposed. I took a day off work and flew to Portland, my stomach in knots the entire journey. Using the address from the investigator's report, I arrived at the house Michael had purchased, a charming craftsman similar to our Seattle home, but with a more family-friendly layout, complete with a swing set visible in the backyard. I parked down the street and waited, rehearsing what I would say when Laura appeared. Finally, around 3:30 p.m., she arrived home, picking up Emma from a neighbor's house before walking to their front door. With my heart pounding, I approached them before they could enter the house. "Laura Wilson," I called out. She turned a questioning look on her face as she held Emma's hand. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Sophia Lambert," I said, watching her expression closely. "I think we need to talk about Michael." Her face showed only mild curiosity, confirming she had no idea who I was. "You know Michael, is he okay?" There was concern in her voice, but not the shock or recognition that would indicate she knew about me. "He's fine," I assured her, "but there's something important I need to discuss with you. It's complicated. Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" She glanced at Emma, then back at me with increasing wariness. "I don't mean to be rude, but I don't know you. If you have something to discuss about my husband, you can call his office." The word husband hit me like a physical blow despite already knowing she considered herself married to Michael. I understand your caution, I said gently, but I promise this is important. I wouldn't be here otherwise. I took a deep breath. I'm Michael's wife, his legal wife. We've been married for 5 years and live in Seattle. Laura stared at me, her face draining of colour. For a moment, I thought she might faint. She instinctively pulled Emma closer to her side. That's not funny, she finally said, her voice shaking. I don't know what you want, but you need to leave. I reached into my bag and reluctantly pulled out the evidence I'd brought: our marriage certificate photos of Michael and me at our wedding and throughout our marriage, recent mail addressed to both of us at our Seattle address. Laura's eyes darted between the documents, and my face disbelief giving way to horrified realization. Mummy, who is this lady? Emma asked, sensing the tension. Laura seemed to remember her daughter's presence and quickly composed herself. Emma, honey, can you go play in the backyard for a few minutes? Mummy needs to talk to Sophia. After making sure Emma was safely playing within view, but out of earshot, Laura turned back to me, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Explain everything now. We sat on the front porch steps, and I told her everything: how long Michael and I had been married, how I had discovered the truth, what the investigation had revealed. As I spoke, Laura alternated between stunned silence and quiet, angry tears. 4 years, she said, staring at the swing set where Emma was playing. I've been with him for 4 years. We met when I was planning a new elementary school. He was so charming, so attentive. She looked down at her left hand at the ring Michael had given her. He said he travelled for work. Seattle, San Francisco, sometimes Los Angeles. Architecture projects. I never questioned it because why would I? He called every night he was away. He never missed Emma's birthday. He helped design her bedroom. Did you ever go to Seattle with him? I asked. She shook her head. He always said it was too hectic during work trips, that he'd take us sometime when he could properly show us around. She laughed bitterly. Now I know why. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women processing the shared betrayal that connected us. What are you going to do? Laura finally asked. File for divorce, I said without hesitation. My lawyer is already preparing the paperwork. But I wanted to confront him first, and I thought you deserved to know the truth directly from me. She nodded, wiping away tears. Thank you for that at least. For not letting me continue living a lie. She looked toward Emma again. What am I supposed to tell her? How do I explain that her father has another wife, another life? The pain in her voice resonated with my own. I don't know, I admitted, but I think we both deserve answers from Michael before we decide what comes next. An idea began to form, unexpected but somehow fitting. He's supposed to come to Portland this weekend, isn't he? Laura nodded. Friday evening, he said he'd be here for Emma's dance recital on Saturday. Would you consider doing something? I asked, outlining a plan that had suddenly crystallized in my mind. It might give us both the answers and closure we need. As we discussed the details, I felt a strange solidarity forming between us, an alliance born of shared betrayal. By the time I left, we had exchanged phone numbers and agreed on a course of action that would bring Michael's double life crashing down around him. On the flight back to Seattle, I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The confrontation with Laura had been difficult, but necessary. Now, only one confrontation remained, the one I'd been preparing for since hearing that child's voice on the phone saying, "Hi, Daddy." I spent the next few days in a strange limbo, going through the motions of normal life, while secretly preparing for the confrontation that would change everything. Michael returned from Portland on Sunday evening as planned, bringing me a small gift, as he often did, a local artisan chocolate bar that I normally would have appreciated. How was your trip? I asked, amazed at how steady my voice sounded, despite knowing exactly where he'd been and what he'd been doing. Productive, he said with a practiced smile. We finally resolved the foundation issues. The project should move forward more smoothly now. I nodded as if I believed him, as if every word out of his mouth wasn't another brick in the wall of lies he'd built between us. I'm glad to hear that. The week passed in this surreal fashion, me playing the role of unsuspecting wife while finalising my plans with both Laura and my attorney. Michael seemed completely unaware of the storm about to break, continuing his routine of work home and secret phone calls he thought I didn't notice. On Thursday, I told Michael I wanted to prepare a special dinner for Friday night. To celebrate the Portland project progress, I explained the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. I know how hard you've been working on it. He looked momentarily confused, then pleased. That sounds great. I don't have any evening meetings scheduled. Another lie. According to his calendar, which I'd checked while he was showering, he was supposedly flying to Portland Friday afternoon for Emma's dance recital on Saturday. He hadn't mentioned this trip to me yet, which meant he was planning to invent another work emergency at the last minute. Perfect, I said, forcing a smile. I'll make reservations at Canlis. It was one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, a place where we'd celebrated special occasions before. Canlis, that's pretty fancy for a work accomplishment, he said, looking surprised. I shrugged. You've been working so hard lately, I thought you deserved something special. He kissed my cheek, completely oblivious to what was really happening. You're amazing. I don't deserve you. For once we agreed on something. Friday arrived and everything proceeded according to plan. Michael came home from work to change for dinner, commenting on how nice I looked in the black dress I'd chosen specifically for this occasion. Our reservation isn't until 7:30, I told him. Would you like a drink first? He accepted the glass of whiskey I offered, settling onto the couch, while I excused myself to finish getting ready. In reality, I sent a text to Laura confirming everything was in place. At precisely 6:45, the doorbell rang. Michael looked confused. We weren't expecting anyone. Could you get that? I called from upstairs. I'm still doing my makeup. I heard the front door open, followed by absolute silence. Then Emma's excited voice. Daddy, why didn't you come to my dance recital? You promised. I descended the stairs slowly to find Michael standing frozen in the doorway, his face ashen as he stared at Laura, holding Emma's hand on our front porch. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, or rather two ghosts from the life he thought he'd kept completely separate from this one. Laura! He finally managed his voice barely audible. What are you doing here? How did you find this address? Before Laura could respond, I joined them in the entryway. I invited them Michael. I thought it was time we all had dinner together. Your whole family in one place. He turned to me with pure panic in his eyes, looking frantically between Laura, Emma and me, as if hoping this was just a nightmare he would wake from. Sophia, I can explain, he started, but I cut him off. Can you really explain maintaining two separate families for 4 years? Can you explain lying to both of us every single day? Can you explain buying a house in Portland without telling your legal wife, or telling your Portland partner that you didn't want children while fathering and raising a daughter with another woman? Laura stepped inside, guiding Emma with her. Emma, sweetie, why don't you watch your tablet in the living room for a few minutes? Mummy needs to talk with Daddy and his friend. Once Emma was settled with headphones on, safely out of earshot, but still within view, Laura turned to Michael, her expression as hard as I'd ever seen anyone look. 4 years, Michael. 4 years of my life. I turned down a job offer in Chicago to stay here with you. I introduced you to my parents as the man I was building a future with. You helped me raise my daughter. Our daughter, Michael corrected automatically, then winced as he realized his mistake. Yes, our daughter, Laura continued, her voice trembling with rage. The daughter you convinced me to have when we'd been together just 6 months. The daughter who adores you and has no idea her entire life is based on lies. Michael sank onto a chair, his legs seemingly unable to support him any longer. Please, he said, looking between us. Can we discuss this rationally without Emma hearing? Rationally, I repeated incredulously. You want rational discussion after what you've done. Nevertheless, we moved to the kitchen where Michael attempted to defend himself with increasingly desperate explanations. I never meant for any of this to happen, he began, the most cliché opening possible. When I met Laura, our marriage was going through a rough patch, Sophia. No, it wasn't, I countered immediately. We were celebrating our first anniversary when you apparently got Laura pregnant. We had just bought this house. We were happy, he shifted tactics. I always wanted children, but I knew you didn't. When Laura told me she was pregnant, I couldn't walk away. Laura made a disgusted sound. So your solution was to maintain two completely separate lives, to lie to everyone, to make promises you could never fully keep to either of us. Michael's excuses grew more pathetic as we systematically dismantled each one. He claimed he loved us both, couldn't bear to hurt either of us, got trapped in a situation that spiraled out of control. At one point, he even suggested that many men would have just had affairs, but he had been committed to both relationships. That's not commitment, I said flatly. That's pathological lying and manipulation. After exhausting his explanations, Michael switched to pleading. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything. Please just tell me what you want. I exchanged glances with Laura, who gave me a slight nod. We had discussed this moment. I want a divorce, I said clearly. I've already spoken with my attorney. The paperwork is being prepared. Michael paled further. A divorce, but we can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start, whatever you need. I laughed incredulously. Work through this. There is no working through finding out my entire marriage was a fabrication. There's no therapy for discovering my husband has another family. And what about us? Laura asked quietly. What was your plan for me and Emma? Michael looked trapped. I love you both. I never wanted to hurt either of you. But you did hurt us, I said. Every lie, every day you lived this double life, you were hurting us. You just didn't care enough to stop. What will happen financially? Michael finally asked, his tone shifting subtly. It was the first glimpse of the calculating man who had maintained this deception for years. If you divorce me, the firm might find out. I could lose my position. Neither of you would benefit from that. I smiled coldly. Actually, I've had an extensive financial investigation done. I know about the separate accounts. I know about the house in Portland. I know about Emma's college fund. I know about the changes to your will. His eyes widened in alarm. You've been spying on me. I've been discovering the truth, I corrected, and I've taken steps to protect myself. Half of our joint savings has been moved to an account in my name only. I've documented all marital assets. My attorney is very interested in how you've been diverting community property funds to support your second family. Now Michael looked truly frightened. You can't do that. That's my money too. Actually, she can, Laura interjected. I did some research after Sophia contacted me. Washington is a community property state. Assets acquired during marriage belong equally to both spouses. You've been using marital assets to fund our life in Portland without her knowledge or consent. That's not just morally wrong, it's legally actionable. Michael's expression darkened. So, that's it. You two have teamed up to what? Ruin me. Take everything I've worked for. We've teamed up to protect ourselves from further manipulation, I replied steadily. You created this situation, Michael. Every decision, every lie, every betrayal was your choice. Now you can deal with the consequences. His desperation turned to anger. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? Both of you. Well, good luck proving any of this in court. It'll be my word against yours. I exchanged another glance with Laura before responding. Actually, we have extensive documentation, photos, financial records, property, deeds, witness statements. Your word won't count for much against that kind of evidence. As the reality of his situation sank in, Michael made one last attempt to salvage something. "What about Emma? She needs her father. You can't keep me from my daughter." Laura's expression was pained but resolute. She does need her father, but she needs a father who's honest, reliable, and present. Not someone living a double life. We'll work out appropriate visitation once all the legal matters are settled. Michael looked defeated, the carefully constructed facade of his double life completely shattered. He turned to me with one final plea. "Sophia, please, 5 years together. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the man I'd loved but the stranger he'd always been. Those 5 years meant everything to me, Michael. That's why I'm standing here now, instead of just serving you divorce papers without explanation. You deserve to see exactly what you've destroyed. As Laura gathered Emma to leave, promising to be in touch about next steps, Michael sat silent and shell-shocked at the kitchen table. His perfect double life had collapsed in a single evening, leaving him with nothing but the wreckage of his own making. I picked up my overnight bag, already packed and waiting by the door. "I'm staying with Alison for a while. My attorney will contact you next week. I suggest you find yourself a good lawyer." Michael didn't respond, staring blankly at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, made plans for a future that had never been real. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt a strange sense of lightness despite the pain. The truth, however devastating, had freed me from living a lie. I had confronted the unimaginable and emerged standing bruised but unbroken. The deception had ended with a child's innocent words on the phone, "Hi, Daddy." Now I could begin the process of rebuilding my life on a foundation of truth rather than illusion. 1 year has passed since that night when Laura, Emma, and I confronted Michael in the home he had shared with me. 1 year of healing, rebuilding, and discovering my own resilience. The journey hasn't been easy, but it has been transformative in ways I never could have anticipated. The divorce proceedings were complex, but ultimately successful. My attorney, Diana, was relentless in pursuing full financial disclosure, uncovering even more assets Michael had attempted to hide. The evidence of his deliberate deception worked strongly in my favour. In the end, I received not just half of our marital assets, but additional compensation for the funds he had diverted to his Portland life. Michael fought the settlement, initially attempting to minimize his financial obligations, but when faced with the mountain of evidence and the prospect of his firm discovering the scandal, he eventually agreed to terms. His once promising career took a significant hit anyway when the partners learned of his double life through the inevitable gossip that follows such dramatic personal implosions. The first months after the separation were the hardest. I moved from Alison's guest room into a small apartment of my own, needing space to process my emotions without an audience. Some days I couldn't get out of bed, overwhelmed by grief, not just for the marriage I'd lost, but for the reality I had believed in so completely. Other days, rage propelled me forward, giving me energy to rebuild my practice and reclaim my independence. I found a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, someone with no connection to my professional circle, who could help me navigate the complex emotions of having been deceived so thoroughly for so long. In those sessions, I learned that my experience had a name, gaslighting on a grand scale, and that my responses were normal, not an indication of weakness or failure. Your mind is trying to reconcile two completely contradictory realities, my therapist explained. The marriage you thought you had and the truth of what was actually happening. That cognitive dissonance is profoundly disorienting and even traumatic. Slowly, I began to reconnect with friends I had neglected during my marriage. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged. Friends who had known both Michael and me found it difficult to know how to act around me now, but others stepped up in ways that touched me deeply, providing practical support and emotional safety without judgment. My therapy practice suffered initially as I took time off to deal with the divorce, but eventually became a source of healing. I found that my personal experience with betrayal and recovery gave me new insights and deeper empathy for clients facing similar situations. I didn't share my story explicitly, but drew on it to guide others through their own painful transformations. Perhaps the most unexpected development was my evolving relationship with Laura and Emma. What began as an alliance of necessity blossomed into genuine friendship. Laura and I found ourselves connected by the unique experience of having loved and been betrayed by the same man. No one else could fully understand what we had been through. We began meeting for coffee occasionally, comparing notes on the divorce and custody proceedings, sharing resources and emotional support. Over time, these pragmatic conversations expanded into genuine friendship. Despite the painful circumstances of our meeting, we discovered we had much in common beyond Michael's deception. Laura faced her own challenges, particularly in explaining the situation to Emma in age-appropriate ways. I offered what support I could, drawing on my therapeutic training to help her navigate these difficult conversations. Emma, resilient as children, often are adjusted to the new reality of seeing her father during structured visitation times rather than as part of daily life. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I made a decision that surprised even me. I left Seattle. The city held too many memories, too many places where Michael and I had built our life together. I needed a fresh start in a location not haunted by what I had lost. I moved to San Diego, drawn by the healing power of sunshine and the ocean. My therapy license transferred easily, and I established a new practice focusing specifically on helping people recover from betrayal and relationship trauma. My own experience became a source of professional insight rather than just personal pain. Michael attempted to contact me several times after the divorce, sending emails that alternated between apology and self-justification. I read them, but rarely responded, maintaining the boundaries my therapist had helped me establish. His relationship with Laura settled into a co-parenting arrangement with regular visitation rights to Emma. According to Laura, he seemed genuinely committed to being a better father, perhaps the one area of redemption possible for him. As for my personal life, I've recently started dating again, cautiously, deliberately, with clear eyes about potential red flags. My first relationship after the divorce was brief, but helped me realize I could still trust myself to make connections, even if trusting others came more slowly now. I'm currently seeing someone who understands my history and respects the careful pace at which I'm able to open up. The experience changed me fundamentally. I'm more cautious, but also more authentic. I value transparency in all my relationships and have developed a finely tuned sense for inconsistencies or evasions. Some might call it hypervigilance, but I consider it wisdom earned at great cost. I no longer believe in perfect marriages or relationships without conflict. Instead, I value honest communication even when difficult over comfortable illusions. I've learned that trusting blindly is not a virtue, but a vulnerability, and that healthy relationships require both trust and verification. Perhaps the most important lesson has been about resilience, the human capacity to absorb devastating blows and still rebuild. When I heard that child's voice say, "Hi, Daddy," on Michael's phone, I thought my world was ending. In some ways it was. The life I had known shattered irreparably in that moment. But from those fragments, I've constructed something new, a life more authentically mine, built on truth rather than deception. There are still difficult days, anniversaries, holidays, random triggers that bring back the pain of betrayal. But those moments no longer define me or determine my future. I've learned that while I couldn't control Michael's choices, I have complete agency over my response to them. If you're watching this and facing your own moment of devastating truth, know that survival is possible. Healing is possible. Not immediately, not without scars, but possible nonetheless. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Protect yourself first, emotionally, legally, financially. Seek professional support from therapists and attorneys who specialize in betrayal. And remember that someone else's deception reflects their character, not your worth. You might not be able to control whether someone betrays your trust, but you always have a choice in how you respond to that betrayal. Choose your own well-being. Choose truth even when painful. Choose rebuilding over remaining in beautiful ruins. I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Have you ever discovered a shocking truth about someone close to you? How did you handle it? Please like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of resilience and recovery, and share it with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most authentic beginnings.